Hello, everybody. Welcome to the last of the Fall BAYT Midrash Series in Sports Halacha. Today we will be discussing extreme sports. So before we get into the nitty-gritties of the case, I would like to do what we have done several times before. Ask everybody what they think the conclusion will be before we get started. So extreme sports, meaning any sport that is more intense than shooting hoops, anything that has a distinct chance of personal injury or injuring the other person. The question is, what can you do so? Why or why not? So feel free to chime in. Extreme sports. Should you be able to participate in them or not? What do we think? Based on what we've
Sorry, I lost the connection for a second. Could you do that definition again? I missed what your question was.
Extreme sports, meaning let's say what goes on in the X Games, when you're doing tricks with your bike, when you've got, let's say MMA, boxing, skiing, bungee jumping, skydiving, all of the extreme adrenaline junkie type sports. Are they permissible or are they forbidden? Why yes, why no? Before we start, what would we think at the top of our heads? Right? So I see Danny saying, of course it's permissible. Why not? Okay, good. They're permissible. Okay, that's one.
I would say it's very subjective, depending on your own personal health, your own training. For one person, something could be extreme. For the other person, it's something they do every day.
Let me rephrase. You're a 19-year-old teenager. Okay, so odds of meaning like you are as fit as you possibly can be, right? 19-year-old, extremely active, right? Let's start that instead. What would they be allowed to? Because as opposed to, we're worried, if you're older, there's health. Have you seen now with COVID, right? Young kids are invincible. Everybody not quite as young is not quite as invincible. So
I'm sorry, I go on a canoe trip every summer, and I sometimes go whitewater canoeing. And I'm not 19. However, I have the training and I know what to do. And I would say for me, that is, and I do it in a safe manner with a personal flotation device. So I would say that's fine. Somebody else, that would be negligence.
So you're saying depends on if you're prepared and ready for the activity. Okay. So right now we see a lot of people being very pro. Okay. Is there anybody who would say that maybe you shouldn't do these things?
I think it depends on the percentage of chance that you would get hurt with it.
Right, like how likely you get injured is a very good point, right? They're called extreme sports, but they're not all created equal in terms of the likelihood of your being injured. So
Bathurst Street might be more dangerous than some of these.
Correct. Exactly, right? Sometimes crossing the street is more dangerous than everybody's like, oh, roller coasters are the best. You go so fast. It's like, I'm sorry, you went way faster down the highway to get to the amusement park than you went on the ride. Just saying. Right? The difference being is that when you're in your car, you're in the nice little bubbles, you didn't feel the wind in your face. So I should have got a convertible instead. But again, statistically, you're safer in the despite one being a thrill ride, you're actually safer on the roller coaster than you are in your car. Right? Assuming you didn't go on the roller coaster ride with some, weird pre-existing medical condition and therefore exacerbated by being on the ride. But for the average person, you're at greater risk getting in the car to the amusement park than any ride at the amusement park. Good point. Okay. So seemingly we have a whole bunch of reasons why we should be allowed to play do all these fun things. Okay, so there's an additional reason for what you're forgetting is that they're awesome. Right? The most important reason why it should be allowed is having something so awesome be prohibited. Okay, so now let's get into it. So we're going to be doing a little bit of review, right? Because the first assumption before we say can you do dangerous activity is there a problem of endangering oneself? which very much relates to what we have discussed in the past. Are you required to keep yourself healthy and fit? So for that, we'll start with so we're going to start with the Rambam and his conception that we've mentioned it several times because it's very relevant to being healthy in sports in general. So the question is, why is it important to be healthy? Okay, so who here fancies themselves liking themselves healthy? I would like to try reading the English of the Rambam in the first verse.
Since having a healthy and whole body is from the ways of God, for it is impossible to comprehend or understand something from the knowledge of God if he is sick. Hence, one must distance oneself from things that hurt the body and should practice activities that strengthen and make him healthy. Whomever sits around and doesn't exercise, even if he eats healthy and takes care of himself as medically recommended, all of his days will be in pain and his strength will weaken.
Okay, so based on this, right, in the Rambam, which I didn't quote for you, has many different examples of healthy activities you should do, and as well as diet, right, medical recommendations that he has. As far as whether you follow them or not, the answer is check with your doctor as to whether or not all those are currently still valid. But right, he gives examples of invaluable medical practices, ways to stay healthy. So based on the concept of you can't serve God if you're sick in bed. Right, so would going to do an extreme sport, going white water rafting with a distinct chance of your boat tipping over, break a leg, right? Badly gash your arm or something and wind up in the hospital. Like that's a distinct possibility. Again, it's not super likely, but it could happen. So should we say stay away from that because that's dangerous? So that's the question. I don't have an answer, so don't worry. We'll slowly get there. Okay, and if somebody doesn't like my conclusion, not to worry. For the exact sport and its degree of risk management levels, Rabbi Kropkin will probably be more happy both to go on the trip with you as well as discuss whether it's allowed or not. So once that's permitted again, we can discuss that more in detail. Okay. So next we have a case which is one of the first cases of you were involved in an extreme sport and things went badly. Okay, so this is a response of the Rosh, Rabbi Asher ben Yechiel. He was a Rav originally from Germany, but had to flee to Spain when the Germans were seeking to capture and ransom him, like they had done to his teacher, the Maharam Rothenberg. So he runs away to Spain and he's a rabbi there. So this is a case he ends up getting involving two wrestlers. Okay, so if somebody here has ever anybody here wrestled besides me? Anybody? No, they're
High school.
High school, the university. Yeah.
Yeah, you did good. So then you're in charge of reading the wrestling case.
Okay, one moment here.
It's okay.
Next time.
Is it big enough? I can make it bigger if it's not clear.
Two people who wrestled with. By the way, I was third in Ontario in high school. So nice. Two people wrestled with one another, and one knocked the other down and fell on top of him. And when falling, blinded the other person. Exempt for 5 reasons, even though we established that man is always liable, whether intentionally, unintentionally, under duress, or willingly, asleep or awake. But in the case of absolute duress, he is exempt. Similar to the case of two people running and injure each other unintentionally, both are exempt. Similarly, in our case where two people wrestled with both consenting, they damaged unintentionally, because it is known that when two people wrestle, the main intent is to take down the other person. And when one takes him down, it is impossible to be precise and ensure that you take him down gently and no one can get hurt, because they are wrestling full force, each trying to knock the other down. And if he hurts him, they knew it would happen. That's exactly the way it is.
Right. Describing wrestling quite accurately.
Yeah.
And it also sounds like body checking in hockey or tackle football.
Right. So that if you get injured, right? You can't say, pay me. It's like, no, like, what do you mean? Like, we agreed to play. It happens. It's part of the game. And like, that's that. So also implicit in here is you didn't tell them stop wrestling, right? That wasn't said in the tshuva. He simply said, you're exempt because, like, you knew going in. The end. So that would imply that we're actually able to join in and there's no problem. Right? So okay, sorry about that. So, yeah. Okay. So right, so the rush says, right, if damage happens, don't worry about it, right? Assuming that everybody involved in the activity. So this is basically saying that if you were to have done an extreme activity, not to worry, permissible, and you don't have to pay the other guy because it was assumed when you started it. But is this really the end of the story, right? According to the rush, it seems like, sure, no problem, just and you're exempt from payment. But the rush isn't the only thing we deal with, right? So now we're going to get back a little bit into the questions of why you're supposed to be so that's what the rush concluded, right? You're not paying, but should you have done something to begin with that can cause you physical harm, right? We're supposed to engage in the activity, right? So, once you're wrestling already, you don't have to pay. But what I said, because he didn't say it's forbidden, does that mean that the rush really meant they thought it was fine, or was it simply just the guy asked him, "Can I have my wrestling partner pay me for my knocking out my eye or not?" And he said, "No, he doesn't have to pay you," and that was the end of the story, and that's why I didn't continue. So for that, let's look at some cases that we can argue are similar or not. Okay. So one case of where you are deliberately afflicting oneself and hurting oneself comes up in when one fasts. So this we see in the Gemara Tani, right? So the tractate all about fasting. Okay. So who here hates to fast?
Hates fasting?
Hates fasting.
Yeah, me.
No, but you had the last one. Anybody else hates fasting? When I saw the smiles. All right, we'll just read in English. Don't worry, nice and easy.
Okay. Rabbi Yossi says, an individual is not permitted to afflict himself by fasting, lest he become too weak to work and be beholden to other beings, and those beings will not have mercy on him. Rav Yehuda said that Rav said, what is the reason of Rabbi Yossi? It is as it is written, and man became a living soul. Rabbi Yossi interprets this verse as a command. The soul I place within you, preserve and sustain it.
Okay, so according to this, are you allowed to engage in an activity that afterwards it would prevent you? No lasting damage here. Just you wouldn't be able to go to work the next day. So would you be able to engage in that type of activity? Let's say you're going on. Let's say you're decided to run an Ironman, right? Which is it's a marathon followed by a 50-mile bike ride followed by a swim. I might be in the order there. Anyways, right? Something ridiculous like that, right? Where afterwards, like you're not going to go to work the next day, right? So in doing so, right, is that a problem? Right? Doing an activity that will make you weak, right? So are you allowed to fast? So this is basically let's say an average day. I want to fast because I just want to fast. Can I? And if there's no, because you'll become weak, and that can lead to bad things occurring to you. Right? So even nothing bad has happened to you yet, but the chance that something bad might happen to you is enough of a reason not to do it. So would this source say we should or we should not engage in any risky behavior? Okay.
No, we shouldn't.
Right, you shouldn't. Right, it's not worth it. So now let's look at another source that seems to say that you shouldn't. Sorry, we'll eventually get to something positive, but it's much easier to say do something awesome than it is to say don't do something awesome. So that's why the sources are a little stacked in one direction. Okay. Also, these aren't necessarily halachic statements that were said. A lot of these are more or less hashkafic, or from other areas of halacha. Okay, so now we have another one from, this one is from Vayikra Rabbah, right? So this is the Midrashim on Sefer Yikra, the book of Leviticus. So an example of, which is quite relevant now, right? Why is it important about relating to, are you allowed to become sick or not? Right? Are you allowed to take a chance that you become sick? Right? Are you allowed to risk it? Okay. So here, so I'll take this one because this is a sickness one. So as the one who's most likely to argue taking the risk due to being, I imagine there's one on the Zoom. If I'm not, please correct me. I know I'm but a child, but therefore sometimes I gotta have some fun. So here we go. Am I taking a risk, right? So Rabbi Acha said a person should take care that he doesn't get sick. Why? Because of the verse in Devarim. Says Hashem, it says the Hebrew is Vasir Hashem Mimcha Kol Choli. Hashem will remove from you all sickness. So rather, how should you read it? Mimcha, it's you that, and who's the one who makes sure that you don't get sick, right? Even though we are given the promise from God that if we follow the Torah and the mitzvot, we will have all sicknesses removed from us. The Midrash here is stating that you actually have to do that true God will, but it's really up to you to ensure that God will end up not making you sick. So it's the exact inverse of what the verse seems to state is what you have to do. So this would also, so based on this, what do we think? Can we or can't we? Right? Another vote in the guess we're not really supposed to do things that are dangerous. Okay.
You can't do anything that will likely injure yourself and lead to sickness.
Right? Likely injure yourself and lead to sickness. Right? So now next we have, right? So now we have the, oh, we would untranslated source. Let's get that one. Okay, great. So we'll start with the Shulchan Aruch. Okay. So, right. So this Shulchan Aruch we mentioned before in regards to in regards to again in our shir on why it's important to exercise to stay healthy so that you can serve God better. So right. So here this is the very last thing, the very last piece that the Shulchan Aruch writes. Right. So he's dealing with I guess at the very, very end, after 4 long sections with a lot of details, this is the last thing he's leaving us off with. Okay, so it's commenting on the fact that why you should put a fence around your houses because if you leave, because it's for the Torah. So the question is why? Right? Why must you put a fence around your roof? Okay, so who would like to who here has let's try another question. Who here has a flat roof? We're not in Israel anymore. Nobody has flat roofs in this country. Forgot. Silly snow. Who wishes they had a flat roof? Let's go with that one. So you can have nice roof parties. Anybody? Okay.
Okay. Similarly, in the case of any obstacle that is life-threatening, there's a positive commandment to remove it, to guard it, and to be very careful with it. As the verse states, guard it and guard your soul. If he does not remove it and he leaves obstacles that lead to danger, he has nullified a positive commandment and violated, you shall not place blood. If anyone violates these things or something similar and says, I'm placing myself in danger and why do others care about me? Or he says he's not concerned with it, we would give him Mardus lashes. One who is careful with these will receive a blessing of good.
Okay, right. So not only are you required to keep yourself safe, but if you were to have done the wrong thing, they will whip you. Right? Martyrs lashes means that you're violating something that even if it's not necessarily written like it's something that the Torah states you can't do, but it's rabbinically prohibited or deemed a bad idea. So they will whip you to make sure that you don't do this again, and nobody else gets the bright idea to try doing like what you did. So that seems pretty bad. And then the Rama, sorry for not having translated it, I'll just summarize it outside. Right, so he's saying it's not commenting here, it's commenting on a different section. He's stating that we have the concept of general halacha of this concept of bittul, but right. So it's something. So if something is either dangerous or risky or forbidden, in terms of like halachically risky, right? Let's say you have a little bit of you find a piece of meat on the floor, right? There's 9 butcher shops around, right? One of them's 8 of them are kosher, one of them is not. Right? You have no problem, eating a piece of meat. If you have 3 pieces of meat and you can't remember which ones we bought from 2 of them are kosher and one of them is non-kosher, you can actually, if you don't know which one's which, you can actually eat all 3 of them because of bittul barov, because it's negated in a larger amount. So after having discussed that, so the Rambam points out that when do we apply this? That's for halachic doubt. Right? If we're afraid that there is a chance that's small that you might end up violating a either biblical or rabbinic prohibition, right? If the majority goes against it, or a overwhelming majority, then you would be allowed or permitted to eat it, or to permit or do said action. But on the other hand, if it's something that's dangerous, like a risk to your actual health, we are more stringent. Chamira sakanta meisura. Right, we are more stringent about danger than we are about if something is mutter or usher, allowed or forbidden. So therefore, you have to be very careful and not rely on miracles, and instead, you should do your best to remain safe. Again, seemingly another source saying that we definitely should not be doing so. Okay, so then we get here's more of the same. Here we go. We'll skip the Baragola because there's some other stuff I want to get to. If we have time, again, we just putting it there because we discussed it, a couple weeks ago. So I figured if you want to read it, it's there. But we're going to head on to the Mishnah Berurah. So in terms of, we mentioned before about how it's a good idea to be healthy. So there's not only it's a good idea. The Mishnah Berurah has even stronger words. So what does he say? Right? Who here has a very nice daily schedule that they like to follow? Okay, or not? There we go.
I used that. I have one, not anymore.
Phil ruined it, but yeah.
It is a mitzvah to conduct oneself with good traits and habits to preserve your health, so you will be healthy and strong to serve God.
Right? Pretty straightforward.
Yep.
Right? So therefore, good habits that'll allow you to keep serving God you should have, but ones that are bad habits and will prevent you probably should avoid doing. Okay, but of course, the important question we have here, this is all stating how you should not engage in a dangerous activity. What is a very important question to ask, which people mentioned in the beginning, right? Elaine mentioned it.
What's a dangerous activity?
Exactly. What's a dangerous activity is a very important thing to define, because if it's not dangerous, no problem. If it's dangerous, well, there's all these things say you shouldn't do it. So is the activity you're doing dangerous or not? So there's actually the way to determine if something's dangerous or not is actually subject to a great debate amongst some of the Achronim. Hopefully you've heard of the 2 people we're going to be quoting. They are the Tzitz Eliezer, Rabbi Eliezer Waldenberg, and Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. So these are 2 great Gedolim of the 20th century. Shlomo who lived in Israel. So they also are. So there's an example of correspondence they had between one another, involving exactly this, of a question of what's considered to be a status of danger, of which case and when you'd have to violate Shabbos to rectify the situation. So it's not quite precisely our case, but it's stating what is the case of great danger, such that we will permit you to violate Shabbos? And do we do things based on statistics or based on perception? Like, what exactly are our relevant factors that we need to take into account to determine, is this thing dangerous or not? Okay, so hopefully the English will be clear. If it's not, please tell me what point wasn't clear, and I will happily explain more. Again, this is from a much larger discussion. Each of their actual positions actually is written in a much longer form. This is just the shortest condensed version of their opinions. Okay. So, okay. So who would like to channel their inner Israeli and read Shalom Orbach?
In regards to the definition of we don't follow in matters of life and death after the majority, you, Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, write that it is in the level where people are scared or stay clear of these things during the week because of the risk of danger. And you conclude, in my humble opinion, this definition fits well with the various cases of the Gemara and the verse, God guards the fools.
Shomer Hashem is the Hebrew there. A few people recognize that phrase.
And since people treat these things lightly, they are no longer considered to be in the formal category of danger. In my
wait a second, Paul. Before we get to the so I'll scroll up a little bit. Here we go. So that was here. I just wanted to show people the Hebrew Shomer B'Tam Hashem. Everybody sees that, right? God, that's like God guards the fools, or also the one used for God. You know why? People may have heard that phrase quoted a lot in regards to COVID-19 of, oh, the chance is so small, God will protect us.
I was thinking the whole thing applies to COVID-19, everything here.
Right. Nobody says it applies to COVID-19. Not a single Rav does. If they tell you that, then odds are you should doubt whether that Rav is reliable and you might want to check his credentials. But I see that that Danny's asking about cigarette smoking. Don't worry, we're going to get there. So when people do say that, for certain, so that's the one, or at a certain point, something's no longer considered to be dangerous, and therefore, right? And then it becomes a Shomer B'Tam Hashem, right? The remote chances that people don't take into account anymore, that's considered to be permissible risk to do. Because technically every activity you do has some degree of risk. As I mentioned, getting into your car has a degree of risk. Let's see what else is degree, like crossing the street. Right, you know, every activity technically has a degree of risk. If you want more on that, please ask your local actuary for what exactly all of your risk factors are. It'll be a very sobering, humbling experience if you go talk to one and get an actual write-up for your insurance purposes. So but then yes, like every single thing does add up and has a risk. But at a certain point, people just nobody considers that risk, and therefore you can write it off. Here's why even according to the opinion of Roshel Zalman, you would not say that it's mutter to disregard COVID, is because just because you as an individual decided that it's okay, if everybody else is saying this is a super big danger, super big risk, you can't decide to ignore common sense and say now it's okay. Right? That's not Roshel Zalman is not advocating for that. He's simply stating that there are certain activities which at a certain point are no longer considered to be worrisome. Right? And the fact that the way people act in their daily lives is a valid point of reference for that. But as I meant, as exactly what the mentioned thing that I just mentioned against is exactly what Rav Waldenberg is about to argue is going to be the conclusion of Roshel Zalman's opinion. Okay, so I believe Mark was going to hear
right. In my Rabbi Eliezer Waldenberg's humble opinion, that is not my position. My opinion is clear that when we say we follow the majority for what is considered dangerous, is not that as I explained earlier in my book, and supported myself with a great poskim, the size of Jewish law. If we follow your definition, we will never know how far this will spread and expand, and we may reach a strange situation where people each start giving their own reasons for why it is permissible, and not everyone's opinion are the same in this area. I know of a certain famous gadol who, for every small ache and pain, he is scared and calls over a professor. Would you allow him to violate Shabbos just for that? And as our eyes see, there are many people, especially women, who freak out over small things that they might faint, especially when someone feels cold or has a fever, and worry over the slightest chance of danger, and will therefore find a reason to allow violating Shabbos over it. And we will create a situation of chaos and confusion, giving everyone the right in their own hand without any guidelines.
Right. So what is so Waldenberg is arguing for a much more formal definition of risk, based on, will this activity lead to loss of limb, loss of life, and the classic definitions of health risk as well as bodily danger, as opposed to Rishon Malzahn saying, well, if people view it as being safe, that's good enough. Because Waldenberg is worried that people are going to start arguing. And once you let an individual make the call, and without any limit, people often have very ill-informed, misconceived notions, and we don't want that to become the norm. And if it does, we'll have these really weird cases, and you can't operate off of weird mob rule where every person is deciding their own thing. That's not how society can function. Right? So, based on this,
sorry, but I have a question. Isn't there a halacha that says the opposite? That if somebody's ill and a doctor says it's not life-threatening, and they say it is, then you take their word for it? And for Shabbos.
Right. So that's right. So that's referring to, let's say, a sick person saying, I need food, or let's say a pregnant woman. Because they're the argument. So some of the qualifications were there. They say that in that particular case, the sick person or the woman would be more attuned to what their personal needs are. There's also the question of the psychological element of it, and whether they're currently in a risky and dangerous situation. Right. So that's not necessarily the equivalent. Let's say the case of, you get yourself a scrape, and you're like, oh my gosh, I need stitches. And then you go to your next door neighbor is a plastic surgeon who takes a look and says, here's a Band-Aid. Right? So it's you clearly overreacted to the situation, and you went to the expert, and he simply said, you are just simply dead wrong. There's absolutely nothing to worry about. So again, if it's somewhere in between, let's say for Hilton Shabbos, where you're worried maybe it's life-threatening, you should go straight to the hospital. No, right? Call it Salah, go, right? You should do the proper medical channels right away, not worth risking life or limb in case of doubt, right? You go straight, you will go to the hospital. But this is stating that as far as the general purposes of what's considered to be a risk or a danger, right? We still have some ground rules for what it is. So if you know absolutely nothing about it, that's fine. And then you want to be machmir about the gof nefesh, that's one thing. But to say that the whole definition is tied to what you consider to be scary or maybe risky, that's a bit different. Right? So there is a point where you're right where let's say a hypochondriac, which is what the case that Waldenberg is mentioning, right? The person who freaks out over, he's got a headache, he's like, must be a brain aneurysm. It's no, just have a Tylenol, you'll be fine, right? It's that degree of dissonance from reality that we're really worried about. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so if there is any reason over remote you think that it's going to be life-threatening thing, again, call the doctor, go to the hospital, do what you need to do. But we're specifically talking about, right? Okay, right. So here the question was, what's dangerous or not? Okay, so also I see Danny mentions, but wait, aren't extreme sports voluntary? Right, and that is an excellent point. Extreme sports are voluntary, which can throw a giant monkey wrench into this whole thing. right? If it's voluntary, then a lot of our nice permissibility is gone, because you can't really pretend anymore. Once you are saying that it's once you're saying that it's right. Once it's voluntary, it's very different than the case we're talking about there, where there's risk you have to take, and there's potential life involved. This is you're placing yourself in that situation. But it is a good example for the two ways to define danger. Is it based on objectively the statistics of being injured, or is it based on the way it's perceived as being dangerous? That was the main point I want to get out of that story. Okay. Right. So that's based on right. So those are two ways to define danger. Right. Statistical danger. Right. Pick a likelihood. And that's where it is, versus perception. Okay. So as far as now that so before we read the next source, which is going to be summarizing basically everything we've been. Yeah, this is the last source. Yeah. Okay, fine. So the next source we have is going to basically summarize a lot of what we discussed so far. But I just want to point out that we've discussed again why it's important to be healthy. We've discussed whether or not you're allowed to take a risk and in what circumstances you can, as well as what's deemed to be risky behavior. So the question is, when are you allowed to engage in risky behavior? When not, as well as what is considered to be risky behavior. We'll have all these factors will tie into can you risk yourself. So this source is from an article Tumen by Rabbi Shlomo Cohen DeRose. I probably butchered the way he pronounced his name, but again, you could find it on in Tumen, which is published by Machal Summit. Very excellent journal in Hebrew, which discusses a lot of contemporary issues. So they had a piece on this just about a decade ago. So which discussed exactly this case, right? So now this is the conclusion, right? So I translate to English. If anything you think is not clear, or if any of the, so we'll do paragraph by paragraph, which will hopefully be summarizing what we've mentioned above. And if there's anything new that's unclear that you have questions about, please feel free to ask. The goal is for the discussion, and hopefully we'll all get a little bit more out of it. Okay. So do we volunteer for the first paragraph? For the first paragraph, we'll alternate because there's a lot of paragraphs here.
I'll start here.
Okay, thank you.
In sports, we opened our article with the question of whether a person is allowed to risk his body in various sports. We must distinguish between the pursuit of sports for health and healing purposes and the pursuit of entertainment and the pursuit of it for livelihood purposes. The Nodeh Yehuda already differentiated with his answer regarding the practice of hunting and wrote that if this is done for livelihood purposes, there's room to permit it. But hunting is usually a dangerous occupation to avoid, and not just because of animal cruelty.
Okay, so based on that, so which reasons of the mentioned before would we be willing to let you engage in a degree of risk? Which one seems like you can versus you can't?
So you can if it's for health and healing purposes. And he includes and the pursuit of entertainment and for livelihood purposes.
Entertainment would be you mentioned these four cases, right? Yeah. Health and healing.
Oh, we distinguish between it. Yeah, right.
Yes.
We distinguish between it. Right. So he sports, health and healing, he talks about there in that paragraph that it seems to be, what is he answering here?
So he's summarizing what we mentioned before. So yeah. He's saying that reasons why is you can do so between health and healing purposes, which seemingly would be allowed for sure. Let's say you're a construction worker, right, and you work on skyscrapers, right? So that's your parnasa. So that's a risk you're allowed to take. Like you're allowed to engage, have a dangerous occupation, such as that. This case being a hunter is what Nodeh Yehuda is talking about. So, but our case let's say, can I voluntarily, go hunting? So seemingly no, because are you really going to risk what will happen if something goes wrong?
Right. Yes.
Okay. So the Nodeh Yehuda says it's a risk, we shouldn't take it. So Now the question is, which activities are considered to be dangerous? Right. So we mentioned before the question of perception versus likelihood. So now we're going to see. So now you can argue with this is the writer of the article speaking here, right? So this is Rabbi Shlomo Cohen speaking. So what does he say? What should be included in the category of dangerous sports? So who's feeling willing to risk everything fun?
In this category of dangerous sports should be included all those activities during which a person reaches a step between him and death. Wow. Sometimes it is precisely this excitement that attracts him to engage in them. And on the contrary, it is this proximity to danger that forbids engaging in these sports.
Okay, so how's it coming out in terms of can I enjoy my extreme sports? Right, very much strongly against.
Yeah,
right?
But that's an extreme example.
But again, a lot of these thrill rides, let's say, bungee jumping, skydiving, right? Adrenaline rush comes from danger involved, or the perceived danger at the very least. Right? So you're saying that exact thrill for excitement you have is the problem, right? Because the only enjoyment is because of the risk is exactly why you shouldn't engage in it to begin with. Okay, we don't have to agree with him. This is what he says. Okay. Also, there's also, also based on, when we ask people the perception of people is also very important, right? Which we'll get to. Like if people view this as being forbidden, then it's probably forbidden. If people view it as being allowed, there's probably a good reason. But we'll still have to debate two sides. Okay. So you can tell from his language that he's pretty against a lot of these things. Okay. So that was, let's say, the bungee jumping, skydiving. We didn't like. He just really definitely doesn't like it. It's like, the potentially risking death, even though you're not really risking death, but the perception of it as if you are. Okay, so now what about hockey? Right? Can I play hockey? Right? If I play hockey every week, is that allowed? So who here hates hockey? They can read the next paragraph. Over here likes hockey? Okay. So, I see Speedy raised his hand. Moshe, you care to read it for us? There's this paragraph here.
There are sports that do not endanger the person immediately, but have a cumulative health risk that can be compared to smoking, in which even the damage is not immediate but cumulative, and otherwise those are the arbitrators who ban smoking for reasons of health risk by Igros Moshe, Osha Mishpat Beis through Ayin Vav, and
skip the parentheses.
Skip the parentheses. Because they spell Rav Nebenzahl's name wrong. We're not lenient. We're not lenient because the risk is not immediate but cumulative. Things that Chaim Chaim wrote about smoking are also good for entertainment sports.
So here, this seems to say that we care about not only the damage now, but also future damage as well, right? If the repetitive injury from said sport, we give you concussions, we give you concussion down the road. Let's say we give you bad knees, right? So, those might be considered to be enough. So here he's really referring to ones that are it'll chop 10 years off your lifespan type things, which are a little bit more clear in there being a bad idea. So right, and you go there for like hockey. It's like, yeah, but if I don't play hockey every week, I'm never going to exercise, and therefore I'll become out of shape and overweight and get a whole bunch of other risk factors. So either way, at least let me enjoy myself within the same amount of time. Like it's going to balance out anyways, isn't it? So right, so that would be. So this one's not precisely exact, but we'll get a little bit more into the question of let's say of smoking and that risk. Okay. So who here is very much against smoking and would like to read the Chavetz Chaim's words about when somebody came to him to ask, can he keep smoking?
Well, so I told them, claiming to be accustomed to smoking and having a hard time quitting, who allowed them to get used to it? The truth of the sages said, whoever injures himself, even though he was not allowed, he is exempt. But in any case, the Gemara said that he is not allowed to beat himself. First, because, and you were saved. And more, it's an a fortiori argument, the Kal Vachomer, and is not the world and the fullness of God is. And is not the world and the fullness of God is.
Meaning,
I don't know.
here, I'll show them. I'll show you the Hebrew. It didn't translate well. Basically, so here, first was because of the Benishmar to guard your life, and it's a Kal Vachomer. Is it not absolute? Is it not based? Isn't everything in the whole world underneath the glory of God? That's the idiom didn't really, when I was translating it, I guess I did not capture it well in the slightest.
Let me finish. And is not the world and the fullness of God is, and his honor we created, and gives to each one in his grace power as they need, for his teaching and for his world. And how will he tonight allow himself to do as he pleases, in the will of his heart and not by force? And if so, when a person observes in his soul the magnitude of the evil he brings upon himself, by this he will be strengthened not to accustom himself to it.
Okay. Right. So why? Right. So somebody comes to you, like, so this is a pretty harsh response. You know. So one of the. So again, as far as some say that nowadays there's a big issue with with yeshiva, with certain students, certain yeshivas smoking a lot. So like, this must be a new phenomena. It's going downhill. Well, actually, this has been going. Homestein passed away in 1930. 37, right? So a long time ago. So, right? So actually, I have the date of his life earlier than the Shabura one. Let's see when I wrote that earlier. Sorry, 1933. Sorry, I was off by a couple of years. 1933, the Homestein, right? So back then, somebody came to him, and this is what he told them, right? With the very beginning, when they're first coming out and saying that smoking is not bad for your health. Right. This was before, like there was similar doctors being brought by the tobacco companies saying that it's good for your health at the same time. Right. So it's in that time period. So he's like, even if you're right, so then like, who said that you could put yourself in a situation where you wanted to do such a thing and had just strong desire? Right. You shouldn't have gotten to that point where you were so like you had the strong need to do so and risk your life. Like you should never have gotten that far. It's bad that you're that far. Okay. Okay. So, right. So saying that you should never have gotten yourself like so enamored by extreme sports because that leads to that can lead to bad things. Okay. Right. So I see. Understand his comment is saying that again, it doesn't seem like there's any problem playing hockey still. Right. True. Right. Because hockey, you could argue like again, it's not strictly bad and will lead to anything problematic. So, I think sorry about that. Let me put it back in the full screen. Okay. So, right. So now, and what's his conclusion? Right.
Oh, you want me to hold on?
Yeah. So just to finish it off.
Indeed, it remains for us to say and emphasize that the deductible and the limits of the permit and its prohibition depend largely on the changing conditions and reality, and the quality of the equipment, the fitness of the athlete, and the conditions available to him must be taken into account. But certainly above all, above the needs of entertainment and the fulfillment of his free time, a person must have before his eyes the value of life given to him by the Creator.
Okay. Right. So he came off very strong, and then in the end, he says that he seems to backtrack a lot and says that if you have proper safeguards in place, perhaps you actually could do everything. Right?
Right.
So it would seem to be that then that you can, that even though he came across very strong other way, he says that assuming you have proper safety precautions, there is a way to do so. But one important caveat is that you don't risk your life for nothing, right? And then you have to make sure that at the end of the day, it's significant and severe risk. Because if you do, then that'll lead to problems. So as far as should you or shouldn't you risk your life? So, right. So the question is right. So why are you right? So why are you choosing to do so, and how does it tie in, or just a joyride? Will be a very significant factor for whether you can or can't. And so the long conclusion: can you or can't you? So let's take again. He mentioned that in fact all sports are a means to an end, fulfilling Hashem's will, and never an end in itself. Right. Good. So if your engagement in sports is meant to be used towards an activity, meaning towards your service of God, right? Like you need your break time to properly serve God, then it makes a lot of sense. Right? Why do I need to? So then, like, why am I taking my break? Because I need to get back into doing what I need to do, and the break is going to allow me to do so. So that would seem that assuming the risk isn't an insane risk, right? Therefore, stands reason that now you can do it. Because now you're assuming you have a good reason for doing it. But simply because, I just want, I'm an adrenaline junkie, would not be a valid reason. But I want a break, and this is what I want for vacation, because I need my mental health matters a lot, and vacation allows me to stay sane. The other, one week vacation carries me over for the next 3 months. So then fair. But to simply do so because you for the thrill of it, would be a lot harder to argue. But on the other hand, there are people who say flat out, you can't ever do these certain activities are considered that have a very high likelihood of you being physically injured. For instance, Rabbi Chaim is very much against skiing, because invariably he will have amongst all those who go skiing. Let's say of all the students or all of this class he teaches, he's got let's pretend he has 60 students that he knows, right, of the age of teenagers, etc., right, including college students. Let's say even 100, right? He knows at least one of them is going to break his leg, right? If 100 of the students went skiing, at least one's going to have a broken limb, leg, something. So that would seemingly indicate that. So he's like, you know what? You're going to lay up for at least a week. So the answer is try a different activity. Skiing.
But that doesn't mean it was a failure. Just because the person broke their leg doesn't mean it's a failure. It still could have been an achievement. The fact they went out skiing it still could propel them for whatever purpose that they went out skiing, to push themselves, to expand themselves.
So he's not advocating you can't have vacation. He's saying just don't go down this pathway of vacation, right? Specifically, these extreme sports, injuries are non-zero, and I see some people getting injured, and based on the fact that there's very high odds of it happening, right? You can't do so. And I know of several people in this year who have gotten injured by taking in these activities, and then they then had a fun month trying to avoid their teacher. We're hiding the cast. Why is your coat on your leg? It's except they go to try and hide it is funny too. But right. So the question, right? So I see Dan's asking how much risk is too much. So that's a good question. For that, please consult your local Orthodox rabbis. In this case, I would recommend confirming the crop before going to any of the more extreme vacations that you can think of. By extreme, I mean not run of the mill that everybody does, but anything a little beyond that, to see whether or not that's considered to be too risky. Because a lot of time it comes down to the given case, right? So is it yes? Rabbi says you can't ski, but many others, I'm sure everybody had the BAYT had there in the past, shul ski trips. I imagine so, maybe.
We went to a football game.
Football game, okay, right. So I know the schools definitely go on group on ski trips, right? So it's clearly it's not really viewed as being so problematic. But on the other hand, have you ever heard of a school going group skydiving? No.
No, there's been a Bayt hockey league though. I mean, Bayt's had a hockey team and a baseball
Right.
team.
Right. So there's certain things that the risk is considered to be minor, negligible, or the net gain being far outweighing, right? Like the Bayt youth teams, right? Where it's like, somebody might get injured, probably not, and even if they do, they'll be fine. It's not, again, like it's not so serious and likely. So therefore, that's one thing. But as opposed to, like the group group paragliding trip is never going to happen because that's just way too risky. Because it's too risky.
Maybe Brian and I will organize it. Brian, you can organize that extreme jumping, okay? You with the two of us.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
I was looking at some stats, and it says in the United States every year, 2 or 3 people are killed in shark attacks when they go swimming in the ocean, and about 100 people die from snow shoveling. So what are we supposed to make from that?
So that's exactly the argument we have between Scholz and Orbach and Professor Oldenburg, right? Is it based on perception or based on statistics? Right? So that's what Scholz was strongly arguing for. It's based on perception. People view shoveling as fine and safe, right? And therefore, you're allowed to do it. People view swimming with sharks as being stupid and dangerous. Therefore, you can't do it. Even though, statistically speaking, one of those is more dangerous than the other, right? So therefore, Waldberg would say, there's a threshold of level of risk percentage-wise that matters, not perception. But on the other hand, right, so those are the two schools of thought, right, depending on which one you're in, right? So, right, whereas, Revoltenberg and Revoltenberg would be much more in the like once it reaches a certain threshold, right, it's, we got to stop, we got to shut it down, as opposed to we have the, everybody still views it as being perfectly fine and safe, so you can continue doing said action. So I see Danny asked about self-defense classes. So that should be fine because you are risking yourself. You're risking your life, but it's permissible to risk. But isn't like that's. But again, risk is ridiculously small that anything bad will happen to you, but from doing self-defense courses. Whereas the potential gain of actually saving your life in the future will definitely outweigh whatever risk there is in taking the course. They asked, MMA based on friendship. I don't know what to make of that one. Because as of what Willie had said about skiing, if there's nothing inherent to the sport or activity that makes it that team building exercise, it's very hard to argue for that activity specifically, right? You could have replaced the word MMA with chess, and the entire paper probably still would have worked. Right? You grapple with each other, you push, as in you could use the same words and the same imagery to describe a chess game and might have the same, social, emotional impact. I mean, not the same people, obviously, because people who, I assume the chess players aren't the MMA people, they tend to not be the same group. But you could have replaced it with a different activity and it would have led to a very similar result. So that's why, not that you can't, again, so then once there is a lot of room to do these activities, just the question is, how far can you go in terms of the degree of risk involved in these activities? Okay. So before we close, just want to advertise that we'll be doing a Winter BAYT Midrash Series. Stay tuned. If you have any suggestions that you'd really like to hear, please contact me or Elaine with your ideas. I have some ideas already, but if you have anything in particular you'd want, we'll bump it to the top of the list. Currently, I'm thinking of doing things on Jewish myths. So I'm hopeful. So again, if you have any particular suggestions that you want in terms of myths, let me know and I'll try and get them researched. Also, if anything else that's not related to that you'd like to hear instead, please let me know. If we feel there's enough desire for it, we'll have it as well. Also, this coming Sunday, there will be a Tanakh in a day by BAYT Midrash Dov. The information is in the email sent out by Rabbi Kraken as well as in the bulletin. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much for the
Thank
series.
you, Meshach.
My pleasure. All right. Take care, everybody.
Bye, Latov.
Well done.